Welcome to the Revo Report. We're inspiring faith with reason and reason with faith.
Wow, this is truly shocking. What if the true test of a religion's claim to peace lies not in its slogans, but in its scars? When a Swedish man burns a Quran and is murdered in his home, but a Christian woman is arrested for silently praying outside an abortion clinic, we're forced to really ask, which faith demands vengeance and which offers grace and peace? I'm Vince Revo. Comment, like, and subscribe below. You could be the catalyst to help us reach 15,000 subscribers. But right now, let's confront this uncomfortable truth, because what happens will shock you.
It seems like you get a death sentence in the Western world if you dare to criticise aspects of the Islamic faith. In Sweden, this man, who admittedly took things to the absolute extreme in a bid to make his feelings known, regularly burnt copies of the Quran. Last night, he was shot dead in his apartment. Now, I don't condone setting fire to copies of the Quran, and I absolutely see how that could cause anger. But just think about this. If somebody set fire to a copy of the Bible or the Torah, would they be shot dead in their own home? I suspect not. In France, teacher Samuel Paty was falsely accused of showing obscene pictures of the Prophet Muhammad to school children. That was a lie. A girl who wasn't even in his class at the time made it up. He was beheaded in the street by an Islamist. Before that, we had Charlie Hebdo, didn't we? They ran a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad on their front cover. Then this happened.
Insane.
12 people were killed because of that front cover. We all know about the Batley Grammar School incident where a teacher remains in police hiding with his family after allegedly showing a picture of the Prophet to some kids, and people gathered outside the school gates calling for his blood. There was a mob outside that school for days.
The incident from Monday, 22nd of March, must also be investigated from a criminal perspective, yes, given that it was a clear attempt to stir up religious hatred. We also use this opportunity to call upon the entire British Muslim community to review the materials being taught in their children's schools.
Now, I do wonder if a teacher had said something that Jewish or Christian students found offensive, or made a joke about one of the Hindu gods, whether they'd have received death threats and been forced into hiding for the rest of their lives. And then there was the autistic child who accidentally scuffed a copy of the Quran at school. He also received death threats, and his mum had to go to the local Islamic centre and beg for forgiveness.
I've had to call the police. He has received death threats. He has received threats that he will be beaten up if he goes back to school. He's absolutely petrified. I don't want anybody to be prosecuted.
Yet again, I'll ask, if a copy of the Bible had been scuffed, would we have seen the parents of a hypothetical Muslim child forced into a church to beg for their child's life? I doubt it. It does appear to be a potential death sentence if you do something, even accidentally, that offends certain elements of the Muslim community. I wonder whether that's why this is allowed.
Yeah, this is crazy, because there's double standards happening, right? Because when offense becomes a death warrant, then we're dealing with something that we really have to stand up and question. Thank God that in countries where there is freedom of speech, you can actually talk about this. But if this is happening in Europe, where there is supposed to be freedom of speech, but there really isn't, can we say that Islam is a religion of peace? Because that's what I've been hearing my entire life. But true peace doesn't demand blood. And just because someone's offended doesn't give you the right to kill someone. This litany of violences, beheadings, mobs, death threats, all over perceived slights to Islam. Would this happen with Christianity? Would this happen with Judaism? The difference with Christianity is Christ forgave his killers from the cross. And that's what you see the pattern of in Christian history. But Islamic extremists reacting to dissent with terror, even in first world countries, even in countries where there is freedom of expression, there is freedom of speech, there is freedom of religion. You contrast that with Christianity, at its core, responds with sacrificial love. Those that offended Jesus, he died for them. He sacrificed himself for them. And we can even look at Muhammad's transformation from preacher to warlord. You might disagree with me, but just look at the history of Muhammad. I'm not trying to insult him here. I'm just looking at history, even history that you can verify from the Hadith or the Quran. Muhammad started off as this peaceful preacher. And I'm sure when the UK was bringing in a decent population of Muslims from Islamic countries, they were coming in peacefully, right? But as they're growing, I don't know what's happening. And I'm not here to question, I'm here to ask, because Muhammad started off as a peaceful preacher, but at the end of his reign, he was this warlord going on offensive wars. And is this the case where we can justify these actions by saying, oh, well, they're inciting religious violence? Nobody was doing religious violence except for the extremist. You know, in Mecca, Muhammad preached tolerance, right? And when he was rejected, he told everybody that the Jews would see him as a prophet, but he was rejected. He would flee to Medina and he would raise these armies. And then either before or after, he was rejected by the Jews as a prophet. He was rejected by the Christians as a prophet. And then he went on to conquer by the sword. And by 6030 AD, he ordered the execution of poets who mocked him. And so are we to follow the footsteps of Muhammad, that if somebody mocks him, you execute them? Compare this to Jesus, for example, who silenced Peter's sword with those who live by the sword die by it. Matthew 26:52. Jesus told us this: if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. And the Greek word here for enemy is ekthros. And it's not just a rival, but one who actively seeks your harm. But what about in Islam? What does it teach? If someone is your enemy, what do? Go after them, behead them, violently silence them? How do we reconcile radical Islam's violence with Christ's command to love our enemies? I'm not trying to incite violence here. Let's have a conversation about it. Even when you look at the comments, you can see people have a similar fear and sentiment, and people just want to have a conversation about this. Some people think it's a cult. They're saying this cult needs to be removed from the UK. Can you imagine a utopia where Europe had never allowed one Muslim entry? No Muslim ever comes out and says, I don't condone these actions. We Muslims are not like this, etc. All the communities always stay quiet. Are there Muslims out there that are willing to say, hey, this is not what we believe in? I think it's difficult because that's what the Quran says. And if your holy book is inciting violence, is it truly a religion of peace? Here it says, the Quran itself should be illegal in the UK. How about that? Radical Islam is the snake in the grass. Moderate Islam is the grass covering the snake, because it's a death cult, not a religion. This person says, no Islam, no peace. No Islam, no peace. Well, I'm criticizing it right now. It has no place in Britain. Why do we tolerate intolerance? So we're not to be Islamophobic, but it's a death sentence to criticize it. Are there going to be Muslims out there who will stand up for this and say, you know what, we believe in freedom of speech? The big TJK says no other religion would do this. No behavior of another religion like this would be tolerated. Offended by everything, ashamed of nothing. 16 years looking into the cult, I cannot find one good word to say about it, not one. It's not a religion unless you count Satanism as a religion. If you want to know who controls the power, look at the ones you can't speak out against. I wonder if there's even going to be some Muslims in the comments down below who are going to say, hey, actually, we can't stand for radical Islam. And then when you look at the Quran, then you're going to have to say, okay, well, I don't agree with the Quran. Just look at Muhammad's legacy. Okay, if we could look at Muhammad's legacy for a moment, he went from rejection to conquest. Just look up the history of what Muhammad did, because a religion's foundation shapes its future. And so when Jews and Christians rejected Muhammad's claims, his revelation all of a sudden turned militant. He was no longer this peaceful preacher anymore. Surah 9:29 commands fighting those who do not believe in Allah. So if we do not believe in Allah, you're going to fight us. Look at that by contrast to Christ's rejection by his own people. Led not to conquest, but to Calvary. Led not to kill, but to forgive. And yet, the Christian religion and followers of Jesus Christ continued to grow, not by the sword, but by peace, by love, by patience, by tolerance. In fact, the reason why we have freedom of speech and are able to talk against Christianity, even to challenge Christianity, is because of a Christian worldview. You contrast that with Islam's doctrine of abrogation, and the later Quranic verses override the earlier peaceful ones somehow. Contrast that with Christianity's new covenant. It fulfills, never erases, the Old Testament. We see that in the New Testament, the Word became flesh and it dwelt among us. It became God with us. It became a peace bringer. It became a reconciler, not a, is the Greek word to pitch a tent. It's to stay, to indwell. God's peace can indwell in us, not the violence that the Quran will teach. God's revelation in Christ is fixed. It is final. It is non-negotiable, not a moving truth like the Quran and what Muhammad was teaching, starting off peaceful, ending to be this warlord. So my question to you is, can a faith grounded in conquest ever foster lasting peace? Let us know. That's a sincere question that I have. And so now I guess we can go to, I know some Muslims say, well, making this video is Islamophobic. I don't think it is. I think this is just people engaging in free speech. So I think we need to dissect this legal and double standard and this hypocrisy. And people need to talk about it and not be afraid to actually speak up.
But this is not allowed. A Christian woman praying silently in her own head outside an abortion clinic.
Can you imagine that? She's praying silently, and she's going to get arrested.
I'll ask you once more, will you voluntarily come with us now?
I think Christians need to speak up at this point.
Ask you some questions about today and other days where there are allegations that you've broken public spaces.
I wonder if that fear of being put on some kind of hit list is why police seem to bend over backwards to please some aspects of the Muslim community.
There is one tier of policing that applies to all of us, and that means that we police without fear or favour. Shukran.
Did police ever ask for permission from the elders to address a Christian audience? Again, I doubt it. And if a group of Jewish people attacked a police station, or even, let's just say, a group of football fans, would you not expect the police to come out and deal with them with force? Well, over to Rochdale now.
Help! Why has only one officer been suspended? What about the rest?
Look, I don't think anyone should go out and set fire to a copy of the Quran or needlessly offend Muslims or be Islamophobic. But what I am saying is there appears to be only one religion in Europe where you might be shot, stabbed or beheaded if you cause offence to some of its followers. Let's get thoughts from my panel this evening. We've got former Tory MP Anna Firth, we've got Lord Bailey and ex-Labour Party advisor Matthew Larser. Anna, I'll start with you on this.
I want to go into my point number 3, which is the blasphemy laws versus free speech. Because here we're seeing civilizations cross, right? And I think moving forward, we're going to have to make a stand. We know that fear breeds tyranny. We know that faith breeds courage. For UK police coddling Islamist mobs while arresting praying Christians, there's a double standard here. I hope and pray that the UK will wake up and that some people will stand up, and perhaps this movement, this kind of right-wing Christian movement that's happening in the US right now, will incite courage in others as well. That their faith will breed that courage to stand up and say, hey, I think this is wrong, and to speak up on it. In Pakistan, blasphemy laws carry the death penalty. In the West, critics might yet Christianity thrives under Roman persecution. Even in the harshest time of Christianity's history, it didn't fight by the sword. It got persecuted, but somehow the power of God moved within those Christian circles, and still it expanded out. Why? Because it was the power of God, not by the sword. You know, here's a legal irony. 47 Islamic nations criminalize blasphemy. 11 impose death on blasphemy. That is insane. Meanwhile, Christ's harshest words were for religious leaders, not secular critics. Truth at the end of the day needs no legal and violent armor. Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The truth of Christianity, the truth of followers of Jesus Christ have carried them out, despite being nonviolent, despite seeking love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, faithfulness, self-control. The truth of the Christian claim withstands scrutiny, not threatens violence. Now, Should Western nations adopt blasphemy laws to protect Christianity? You have critics of Christianity raging on. You have them in my comments. You have them out on the market squares talking about how Christianity is wrong, how Jesus is not God, how the Bible is irrelevant. Yet there's no violence going on them. Even Alex O'Connor, who is in the UK, speaks on he doesn't need to be afraid. But he even calls himself a cultural Christian. Let me tell you, friends, there is a scandal. There is a scandal of grace. Christians turn the other cheek. They don't turn to swords. And there's a difference between power surrendered, power seized. The sword seeks to seize power. The Christian surrenders that power. But I still believe that Christians need to speak up. When we look at the cross of Christ, the crucifixion upended earthly notions of strength. While Islam venerates Muhammad's victories, Christians worship a God who lost to win you and me, to win us to eternity. This inversion of power explains why believers don't riot over burned Bibles. We pray for them. We choose to love them. This can spark a revolution, and it did in the early church, even when Rome was martyring Christian after Christian. Studies show in sociology that societies valuing forgiveness, for example, post-apartheid South Africa, heal much faster than societies trying to force compliance. Islam's honor-shame paradigm fuels cycles of retribution. Christianity's guilt-grace paradigm breaks them. Paul told us in Romans 12:21, do not overcome evil by evil, but overcome evil with good. That's what Jesus did on the cross. And this Greek word overcome, nikao, means to conquer decisively. So despite not conquering by the sword, Jesus conquered decisively, not by force, but by faith. But how can this grace survive in a world of swords? There is an unbreakable kingdom. There is a kingdom that cannot be conquered by the sword, and it is the kingdom of God. And this is why Jesus Christ's peace outlives empires, outlives rulers. The truth is, martyrs plant seeds of love. Tyrants plunder seeds of hate. Islam spread by the sword, but Christianity spread by the scaffold. Today, over 360 million Christians face persecutions, yet the church grows faster where it is oppressed. Why is that? Somehow resurrection hope outlasts earthly fear. Do you know that 80% of all religious persecution targets specifically Christians? Yet in Iran, the underground church balloons despite executions. The same is happening in China. The blood of martyrs is a seed. And Jesus promised us that the gates of Hades will not prevail. You see, gates there is a defensive stance. Hell itself retreats as the church advances. So those of us that are Christians, advance. Don't back down. Speak up. Speak truth in love. Will sights like this frighten us, or will it embolden us to draw ever closer to God in prayer, in Bible reading, in community? I pray that this would lead us from fear, perhaps, as a natural response to fearlessness, because Christ doesn't turn pain into platitudes. He turns crucifixions into resurrections. And whatever you're facing in your life, know that your scars aren't setbacks. They're launch pads, and that God will do something great with them. When the world demands you to retaliate, we kneel to a God that is all-powerful. When culture screams submit, we stand because Jesus stood for us. And you are not a victim, you're a vanguard. Every insult forgiven, every threat met with prayer, writes a new page in the story Satan thought he'd ended at the cross. So rise, preach, love. The tomb is still empty. Our God is still alive. The world has never seen a weapon stronger than a heart unshackled by hate and walking towards the love of God. If this ignited your courage, smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. Flood the comments with stories of how Christ's peace disarms your battles. Stay bold, stay gracious, stay revolting against despair. Speak up. Your voice matters.
Welcome to the Revo Report. We're inspiring faith with reason